Hi everyone, my name is Armen, currently a student at UCLA studying International Development Studies.
My name is Tyler Landis. I am a student at the University of Oregon, and my current study is economics.
And my name is Noah Mass. I'm a student at North Carolina Central University, and my major is Recreation Administration.
So, the project that our group was tasked to do was emergency training and preparedness. What that entails is looking at other institutions and finding what they do well in training their staff to respond to smaller emergencies, and collecting that information and seeing where the University of Oregon falls. So along with that, our goals and objectives: to create a national benchmark for emergency preparedness among collegiate institutions. What that means was we went out, interviewed 28 schools, or actually got 28 replies. We sent out about 60 emails, and what that entailed was we sent out questions. They answered them. They brought it back. We dissected that information and compared it to where the University of Oregon or PE and Rec stands. What that entailed was, so we took the information that we got from all the other institutions, and we compared it with information that we got from our institution, and we created a national benchmark, kind of an average of where nationally institutions are when it comes to emergency preparedness and preparation, and compared it to where the University of Oregon stands. So, our definition of emergency is, in the context of our project, is anything that is kind of more localized, smaller emergencies, anything that entails first aid or conflict resolution. We didn't dwell on any of kind of major emergencies such as natural disasters, fires, active shooters. We didn't dwell on those emergencies because there's actually a system in place called Enterprise Risk Services, which is a contracted institution that colleges use to kind of prepare themselves for major disasters, such as natural disasters, fires, active shooters. So they've already created a benchmark and a plan for all of the divisions in each college, and so we didn't feel like we had to dwell on that. We wanted to dwell on stuff that the UOPE and Rec can kind of handle on themselves. So, what this graph says is we went out and we interviewed student staff here, and we asked them to kind of give us a rough percentage of how they feel their peers are their ability to respond to emergency situations. So we asked them, they said they feel about 70% of their peers are able to handle a real-life first aid emergency, and 30% aren't. And that is a little bit lower than the average that we got from other schools, which was 80% and 20%. And we understand that these are very arbitrary numbers. This is very opinion-based, but we just wanted to kind of show that where we feel that our confidence is in responding to emergencies, and where the confidence level of other institutions are. So these are the schools that we contacted and that reached back to us. We were able to get 28 schools to fill out our questionnaire and send us data back. These are just some of the schools that we selected. We try to disperse our schools about as evenly geographically as possible, and about as evenly when it comes to terms of enrollment size, when it comes to square footage of their facility. That way we can get kind of a broad understanding of where each level of institution is at with their emergency preparedness, and to see if those factors play a role. So here is a map of the institutions that we contacted. We are aware that there is a little bit of a gap in the Colorado, New Mexico area, kind of that Midwest region. The only reason for that was we reached out to schools in those regions, and either they didn't get back to us, or we just didn't have enough time. Like the group before us mentioned, we had about a 3-week time frame to do this project, and so we just reached out to as many schools as we could, and the schools that got back to us happened just to not fall into the kind of Midwest area. So we did try to make a conscious effort to get each geographical background. That way we can broaden our information, our data collecting, and create more of a standard rubric, but those are the schools that were able to get back to us. So these are some of the questions that we asked. We asked questions like, how many student staff does your department employ? How many times do you train or refresh your students when it comes to first aid and CPR? And what percentage of your staff do you feel is ready to handle emergencies? We asked more questions than these, but we feel that these are the questions that really kind of spoke value to how they are prepared. We felt like these were the important questions to kind of highlight. We do understand that, like, when it comes to what percentage of your staff do you feel is a little bit of an arbitrary number, but like we said, we were just trying to gauge to how people feel their own staff is prepared. So this is the rubric that we use to classify other institutions. We classified them into 3 categories, which included above average, average, and below average. How this rubric works was we all sat down and collectively analyzed the data and determined which schools we felt were going above and beyond when it came to training their staff and preparing their staff for emergency situations, which schools we felt were average, and which schools we felt were below average. And then we looked at certain trends that we found that were kind of that were continuous with each schools, and we decided to make a rubric for that. So how the rubric works is to be in an above average, you must have all of the categories in average plus 1 in above average. So if you're an above average school, you have all of the categories in the average column plus 1 in the above average. If you're an average school, you have all the categories in the below average to be average, and so on. And we decided to do that because what we found out was when it comes to the above average schools is the information that we collected, you could tell that they go above and beyond. But the problem with creating a rubric was each school does a little bit differently. We do know that there are different leadership styles, so each school was a little bit different. So creating an overall rubric was a little bit of a challenge, but we feel that this is best representation of the schools that are above, below, and average. And I'll hand it off to.
Thank you. So as far as our observation goes, we're going to present 2 of our observations, 2 trends that we saw in the above average category and in the below average category. So for the institutions that fell into the above average category, we noted some of their trends include frequent red shirt drills, in-house first aid training, and sometimes even cost deduction by the institution if their budget allows. A risk assessment committee that can be made up of either professional staff, student staff, or a combination of both. And individual departmental or area trainings. And the best way to explain this is if a student is sitting in a lecture hall with 400 students versus a smaller classroom size with 20 students, the student in a smaller class size is more likely to have a better one-on-one connection with the instructor and more likely to retain some of the information that they learned. So we feel like by the data that we analyzed, smaller departmental and area trainings are a little more effective than a larger department training with, say, 300, 600, 800 student staff. Some of the trends that we saw in the below average category include poor documentation of employee certification. So that's either not keeping track of who's certified or when certifications expire. Lack of supplemental trainings aside from the initial orientation or initial requirements. So that would include our initial requirements based off this project are CPR, first aid, and AED certifications. So supplemental trainings and certifications would include sexual harassment, conflict management, Title IX training. So certifications and trainings along those lines to better round out the average student staff employee. And another trend that we saw was high cost of training practices is an issue for stricter budgets. So if institutions cannot offer, first aid or CPR training within in-house, just because of their budget, it may cause some conflict, which will lead back to our first point for documentation of employee certifications. So with all this, where does University of Oregon's Physical Education and Recreation Department stand? We created a little chart. So the yellow box up on top that has 6 is the above average category, which 6 schools out of the 28 that we got responses from fall into. The green box is the average category, which 16 institutions fall into, and the gray box is the below average category, which 6 institutions fall into. The standard bell-shaped curve that's presented here is not something that we tried to do. That just came up coincidentally, and goes to show that there is normal distribution of average, below average, and above average training and preparedness among collegiate recreation centers. So based off of our rubric, we were able to find a national benchmark, which would be in the middle of the average category, which is a black dotted line right over here. Currently, the University of Oregon's Recreation Department does fall a little bit below the national benchmark due to various reasons. Trainings, confidence in conflict management, and first aid, CPR, and related incidents. So the red dotted line is currently where the University of Oregon stands, but still in the average category. And the green dotted line is our minimum long-term goal where we would like to see University of Oregon meet. So we would like to not only be in the above average category, but by implementation of our short and long-term goals, which we'll present in the next few slides, we hope to be a leader in emergency preparedness and trainings across collegiate recreation centers. So some of our observations that we noticed is that most institutions in the above average and below average category fall into facilities within 100 and 200,000 square feet. This is just a trend that we saw, and it's not any sort of rule that the best school has to have a 150,000 square foot facility. It's just a trend that we saw, and to give those of you who don't know, point of reference, the University of Oregon's Recreation Department does have a facility size of 250,000 square feet, so near the average benchmark. So as you can see, the green and the yellow bars do represent the above average and below average, and they do fall within the red bracket. Another visual aid shows that most of the institutions that we interviewed are within the 100 and 200,000 square foot facility range. That's just the average from the data that we collected. Of course, we do have smaller institutions and larger institutions, but they do play a smaller portion of the full larger picture of all the information that we gathered within our sample. So next is a similar graph, but not with facility size, but with student enrollment. This is both graduate student and undergraduate students within the facility, and this only considers on-site students, so this doesn't consider online students because they would not necessarily be entering the facility, so they wouldn't really have an impact in our presentation. So similarly, most of the institutions in the above average and below average category tend to fall within student enrollment size of 20,000 and 45,000 students. And again, the University of Oregon does fall within this average. So likewise, we're looking at the yellow and green bars. They do fall within, most of them do fall within that little bracket, and we do have outliers. Of course, not to say that smaller institutions or larger institutions can be the best and the leader in collegiate recreation preparedness, or on the opposite end of the spectrum, on the least prepared side. Another visual aid with student enrollment is just another pie chart that we made. So less than 20,000 students is depicted here, a little over 1/3. Between 20,000 and 40,000 students, again, a little over 1/3, which is where the University of Oregon stands, and over 40,000 students is the smallest makeup of our sample, 22%. So let's move on over to recommendations and proposed implementation plans, which is all gathered off the information that we gathered from the rubric and the classifications of each institution according to that rubric. So for some of our short-term goals include creating a risk management committee, either comprised of all career staff, all student staff, or a mixture of a combination of both. We feel like that the risk management committee, their main purpose would be to document and keep track of all certifications, expirations, training dates, creating a master calendar of when everything would happen. Next, we have two emergency preparedness trainings per year, something that the institution does currently, the department does currently have, but from our interviews, we gathered that it wasn't as structured as it could be, which is outlined a little bit more in our portfolio. Introduce red shirt drills in trainings and also during on shift. One-on-one audits with career staff member and a student supervisor. So what a one-on-one audit is basically, for this specific one, is a career staff auditing a student supervisor off shift to make sure that they can handle any sort of scenario, whether it's conflict related or first aid medical related. And then you'll see that in the long-term goal, we plan on having the audits implemented by student supervisors to every single student staff, and preparing student supervisors to administer student staff audits. Create and implement documentation system to maintain all student certifications and training records, something that the risk management committee will handle. Some of our long-term goals include consistently maintaining all short-term goals. So something we noticed in our interviews is that a lot of the short-term goals that can contribute to setting an institution in the above average category aren't consistently maintained throughout institutions across the nation. So consistently maintaining all of the short-term goals is very, very important. Next is a one-on-one audit with student staff administered by student supervisors. 4 times per year, once per term. Our budget, after speaking with our advisor, we found a budget for this audit throughout the whole student staff at $4,100 to definitely be something that can be budgeted into the beginning of the year budget. Next is implement common red shirt drills during shifts and create a master training calendar for the department. And also introduce additional supplemental trainings like we mentioned earlier. And a timeline for our implementation plan, kind of gathering information throughout the summer, starting most of the implementation, the one-on-one audits with the students in the fall, taking, not diving in head first, but taking 1 footstep at a time, so not overwhelming the department with all of the implementation plans. In the winter, implement all the staff one-on-one audits, as well as research feasible red shirt drills and implement additional supplemental trainings. And finally, in the spring of 2017, expand our risk management committee and implement the feasible red shirt drills. All of our recommendations contribute to what we feel like will place the University of Oregon's Physical Education and Recreation Department not only in the above average category, but to be a leader in the above average category, leading all emergency trainings and preparedness across all institutions in the nation. Thank you guys for your time. If you have any questions, please let us know. Good.
Is there a proposed budget for these trainings? Because some of them might take longer, so longer training days. Is there a proposed budget for that?
Yeah, so we do have a training, the figure that I mentioned earlier at $4,100, that does take into consideration all the audits that need to be done off shift for 150 student employees, 10 supervisors administering the audits, at the current minimum wage of $10, or I think it's $9.75. We rounded it up to 10 to be generous. And the rest of the red shirt drills would be administered on shift, so that would not affect our budget.
Can you explain the difference between one-on-one audits and red shirt drills?
Yeah.
So a one-on-one audit would be something that either a supervisor or a pro staff would lead with a student employee. So what that would entail is just going over emergency practices, making sure they know their proper procedures when it comes to first aid, a little bit more of a refresher. When it comes to red shirt drills are practice emergency scenarios. So and that could entail anything from getting a call from a weight room staff saying, hey, someone collapsed near the benches, and then you have to go, you have to treat it like it's a real emergency. The current staff who's on staff right then doesn't know it's a fake emergency. So we feel like red shirt drills are something that we really want to implement, just because that is an experience that, one, all student staff have to be on their toes because it could happen to anyone, and two, it really creates more of like more initiative to be prepared, because you don't want to fail a red shirt drill in front of your boss. So those are kind of the differences between a red shirt drill and a one-on-one audit.
Do you see any current problems with the rec emergency plan that we have here now, or is this hypothetical to be more prepared in the future?
One of the problems that we see now in conducting interviews with student staff was the main problem we felt was a lot of them didn't know when the last time they were trained. As an employee here, I do know that we do 2 trainings, once in the fall, and we did one last winter, and once in the beginning of the fall and one last winter. But for the student staff that was on that we interviewed, a lot of them didn't know when the last time they were trained. So we feel like one of the biggest holes in our emergency training and preparation here at the University of Oregon is there really isn't any constant refreshers. I do know that last term, as a supervisor, we did meet with Bev and do a termly CPR first aid refresher with a dummy. But that was something that was very new and wasn't really implemented. And this is something that we want to make a standard throughout the whole year.